School board meeting, and I will call this meeting to order. We have Mr. Derricks, Ms. Tift, Ms. Ostendorf, Mr. Bryant, and Chair Rowe present. We are missing Nikki Buck and Holly Tower this evening. If we could all stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Mr. Bryant will share our vision and mission this evening.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The mission of the Reading Public Schools is to educate all students and inspire them to realize their full potential and become respectful, responsible, and productive citizens.
Thank you. Meeting agenda is in your board book. Does anybody have any changes, additions that we need to make? All right, seeing none, I'll take a motion to approve.
So moved.
Mr. Bryant. Second. Seconded by Ms. Ostendorf. Any other comments? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, agenda carries. So the first item on our agenda is the educational plan, and I will just call your attention to that. It's attached to every school board book that we have. Calls our attention to our top priorities right now in the district and how we are going to achieve those. Next on the agenda is recognitions and upcoming events. Anybody have anything?
I'd like to announce something. Tim Bowes is leading an effort of the Red Wing High School Theater to present a dramatic production. It's an adaptation of Henrik Ibsen's An Enemy of the People. That will be on, well, first of all, admission is only $5 for adults. High school students can get in for free with a non-perishable food donation. So it's a great price. It'll be held on November 3rd, or no, I'm sorry, this Thursday and Friday, the 4th and the 5th at 7 p.m. and then Saturday, the 6th at 2 p.m. and 7 p.m. So we're excited to be able to host this year.
Great. Any other upcoming events?
Madam Chair, just a reminder, I won't be able to attend, but you have the Veterans Program on Friday, November 12th. Welcoming all our veterans, the community, our staff members that are veterans, and students participating. There are some requirements of wearing masks and social distancing and all that. But I think the time is 9:30, if anybody has that for sure. 9:30, come on out and support your veterans on this very special veterans event at the school.
And the time is 9:30 here at the high school.
Thank you.
I'll just highlight tonight is the winter sports meeting up here at the high school. So we're getting our winter sports up and going starting today. This is the new season. So congrats and good luck to all of those athletes as they embark on their new season. Any other recognitions, upcoming events? Seeing none, we'll move on to public comment. I did not receive any public comment this evening. Did you, Karsten?
I did not.
All right, so no public comment this evening, but just as a reminder, when we do have somebody here for public comment, we expect all comments to remain respectful and not name students individually. We also ask that any comment is within 3 minutes, and that is the rest of our outline of public comment guidelines are found in our board book always, and that's on page 8 tonight. All right, so financial audit, presentation, and approval. That is what is next on, no? COVID-related topics. How's that for get you ready and then pull you back? Sorry about that.
Yeah, short. Each meeting we include information about COVID related data. the latest learning plan, the face covering policy, criteria and timing for suspending and reinstating face covering, policy, vaccinations, and testing. So at this meeting, we don't have any recommended changes. I know the COVID response team has been reviewing it and kind of combining some documents together. And there may be some changes recommended on November 15th, but there's nothing for tonight.
Any comments or questions for Superintendent Anderson? Okay, now we'll move on to the financial auditation approval. Thank you for being here. We've got a couple of guests with us this evening. Mr. Ollinger and Sheila Youngworth. So
Well, thank you. Hopefully you can see my screen sharing, but yeah, I'm Tom Ollinger, a governmental service partner from Abdoik and Myers. With me is the in charge on the job is Sheila Junkworth, and we're going to go through just the financial statements at a very high level. Earlier, about a week ago, we went through in detail with the finance committee, but we'll go through the audit results. Sheila will go through those, and then I'll go through some key metrics of comparisons between other school districts on various measurements. So with that, I will turn it over to Sheila to kind of go over the audit results.
All right, so starting off with your audit results. For the district's fiscal year 21 audit, we expressed an unmodified or clean opinion stating that the financial statements are presented fairly in all material respects. This included the legal compliance testing and single audit report as well, and the district had no findings in fiscal year 21. Jump to the next slide there, Tom. All right, so jumping into some financial analytics for you. This first graph is showing your cost per ADM in the general fund. In fiscal year 21, the district's cost per ADM was $14,303, which was an increase from prior year due to a drop in ADM. Next slide. So this next slide is showing the unassigned reserves in general fund, which had a slight decrease from the prior year's 15.5% of reserves to cover next year's expenditures, down to just 15% in fiscal year 21, but is still well above the district's fund balance policy of at least 5% of next year's budget expenditures, which is just shy of $37 million in fiscal year 22. Next. So here we're going to look at the general fund. So the general fund ended the fiscal year 21 with an increase of $2,194,408, putting your total fund balance at $7,718,853. The majority of these excess budgeted dollars are earmarked to be used on projects that were rolled into next year and will be spent down in fiscal year 22. This next graph is comparing the district's three major funding sources, not only by the district's own prior year data, but also by prior year data from other districts within the region, as well as statewide averages. Overall, the district did a great job bringing in additional revenue during the year to match the budgeted increase compared to the prior year, and is falling in line with other district averages as well. Next here is breaking down your general fund expenditures by program. So overall, the program expenditures have been staying pretty consistent, with the largest noticeable change being in the elementary and secondary regular instruction, ending the year with a combined total increase in expenditures following the budget increase that you had during the year as well. Now I'll turn it off to Tom to break down these general fund expenditures by ADM for you.
Okay, well, thanks, Sheila. I think on some of the comments that Sheila made, what you'll see in these graphs is a steady increase in expenditures over this last year, and that's pretty common with school districts across the state, with a combination of additional federal dollars going back that were funded by that were funding some of these expenditures with those dollars. So. As you can kind of see, for the overall general fund expenditures did increase over this last year, and is trending upward. And like I said, that will probably follow with what most of the other school districts have this last year. Overall general fund expenditures by object code. This kind of shows the mix of the type of expenditures. And as you can see over the last 3 years, really the mix of expenditures between salaries and purchase services have stayed relatively consistent in these last 3 years. Taking a look at the overall general fund balance as a percentage of expenditures, this just kind of shows the health of the school district. So as you can see over the last 2 years, there has been a general increase in that fund balance. So this also includes restricted dollars, which includes long-term facility maintenance dollars that will be used for future. And also, as Sheila talked about earlier, just earmarked expenditures that were not spent in the current budget, the budget cycle. Taking a look at food service, the budgeted revenues exceeded by about $94,000, which did have an increase in the food service fund, partly from additional federal and state dollars related to that fund. Overall, a healthy fund balance. And kind of taking a look at the overall expenditures for the food service, they're really tracking in line with what other school districts are, and is kind of right in that 50 to 75 percentile over the last 4 years. Community service. Once again, this was a situation where the revenues did exceed the actual amounts for this year, which resulted in an increase in fund balance, partly due to the uncertainty on how these programs would react in the COVID environment. So with this, the majority of that increase is additional fees for programs that were provided over this last fiscal year. And kind of taking a look at the community service, it is on the high end to other districts, which really kind of plays into what type of programs. So Red Wing Public Schools has a pretty extensive community service program in relationship to other school districts. So that is why this is running at that higher level, but has stayed pretty consistent over the last 4 years.
Can you just explain a little bit about what community service is, mostly for our listeners?
Okay, yes. Community services are really just, your outside programs that you have for community ed and community rec and those types of programs that you have out there for outside of the normal school day activities. The debt service fund is, we have the next bonding, which will be the 2014A, will drop off at 2025, which you'll see over the next 10 years that principal and interest will stay pretty consistent over the years, which are really funded by a debt service levy to cover those costs. So this includes both the school refunding bond, some capital leases from 2016. Taking a look at the overall cash and investment balances by fund, the cash did increase by almost $2 million, which is a direct relationship to that increase in fund balance in the general fund. But as Sheila had mentioned earlier, the intentions is that this will be spent down in future years and probably pull pretty consistently with the last 3 years. Overall property taxes. So we're kind of doing these comparisons include the region and then also statewide averages from information that we pull from MDE. And so the per ADM, is right around that state average. You kind of take a look at the district property taxes per 100K in home value. This kind of gives you an idea of what the impact is on a resident. And as you can see, at 475, it is below the state average and also below the region average for this last year. Just a couple of final metrics here. Administrative expenses has kind of trend really right and pretty consistent over the last 4 years, and is in the lower percentile of that. And as they kind of take a look at the next slide with the elementary and secondary instruction, which is kind of tied with the actual teachers and their costs. Taking a look at that has stayed right in line with what those statewide averages are. Kind of following into that 25 to 50% tile. Special education expenditures have been increasing, and this is tied to what is the mix within your school district for these special ed needs. So as you kind of see, it's been trending in the higher level there, and did have a little bit of an uptick for 2021. The instructional support services did increase this last year. This is kind of the services to help support the teachers, and as you move forward in 2021, that did increase. Some of these expenditures are related to the federal dollars that were offsetting these costs, but overall is just kind of in that upper tier. So overall, the audit. The management did a great job of providing us the information and working through the audit process. So we certainly appreciate that. And as you can see, that the fund balances within the school are fairly healthy and have earmarked for future needs going forward. So with that, I'd certainly open it up to any questions that anybody might have.
Mr. Bryant.
Thank you. Tom, I don't have a question. I just want to thank you and your staff for an excellent job. I love the slides, the graphs and all that. And I know you on another level too, and you've always been professional, you and your staff. And I just talked to Wendy today on another matter unrelated to the school board. So they all handle themselves very well, and it was a very good report. So thank you.
Well, thank you.
Are there questions or comments anybody has? I don't see any.
Okay. Well,
But your email addresses there listed on page 24 of the board book. And so we do know how to get a hold of you if we do have some. This was a very wonderful report in terms of thoroughness. I really appreciate that. And it is nice. I'm a visual learner, so it is nice to see all of those graphs. So thank you.
Well, thank you, and we appreciate working with your school district. And like you said, our emails are out there. Feel free to reach out to us with any questions that you might have. So thank you.
There's one last thing. Just recently, they changed the name from Abdo-Eichenmeyer just to Abdo, and it's very branding is very, very unique and nice. So I like it.
Well, thanks. That's great to hear. So.
Thank you for joining us this evening.
Okay. Yep. Have a great night, everybody.
Thank you.
Yep.
I am looking for a motion to accept the 2021 audit as presented.
So moved.
I'll second.
Moved by Mr. Bryant, seconded by Ms. Ostendorf. Any other comments? All right, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, audit carries. Thank you. School board reports. Let's see, who would like to go first? What do we have for finance? We'll start there.
Okay, since I'm the only one here, that's, we went over the audit. I'm not gonna repeat that. We just approved that. We discussed the ADMs and how they're impacting us. And September financials were for the treasurer's report and for the budget. The treasurer's report, we have some bonds and stuff coming due, and we're looking at, with interest rates, inflation kind of creeping up, we're thinking that sometime down the road we might start seeing better returns than 0.2, 0.1. So we're looking at that constantly and working as they come due. There'll be investments will be went over with our investment advisors. And budget reconciliation, we're still looking at that, staying true to that 2.2 reductions or more. The 5-year budget projection was not that great as to, we all know that down the road, our fund balance is kind of, if we don't do something, our fund balance will be either way down into the red. We don't want to do that. Don't get into statutory debt. So we're looking at that constantly, as should the board too, as we go forward and as we go into our future years of budgeting. So that's in a nutshell what we talked about. A lot of time was taken during the audit, was just presented.
All right, thank you. Anything to report from operations?
No, we haven't met again. We just canceled today's meeting as we did last month's meeting.
Okay.
Last month we reported on, we're supposed to do busing for next year, but that must be pushing down the road.
Okay. Personnel committee, I gave an update at our last meeting, so we haven't met since then. There's nothing new there. Legislative and policy committee, any updates there?
I wasn't there, so I'm gonna defer to Anna.
Yeah, so we met last Monday and we went through policies 500 through 525. Yes. And we flagged a couple as possibly needing some discussion by the full board. 504 is the dress code policy, which may need to be updated. And 506 is our discipline policy, and it doesn't necessarily reflect, or it may not fully reflect, all of the things that the district has implemented with PBIS and other things like that. So we thought that might be a potential workshop topic to look at all of the things that are happening in relation to discipline and make sure that the policy reflects what we want it to. I think that's it, yeah?
That's a lot. Thank you. With negotiations, we've met with the custodians last week. We're going to meet with them again on Friday. We're hopeful that we'll be able to hammer out the next agreement. So we're looking forward to Friday and meeting with them, and then we'll be meeting with the teachers again this Wednesday, excuse me. So we've got a lot in the hopper, but we're very hopeful, and things are going well in both of those areas. We are also continuing to meet with the district directors and
Principals
principals, thank you, and cooks.
and cooks.
And cooks, yes. A lot. So we've got a lot to do at the same time. What else do we have? Anything else?
The equity team met on Wednesday, I believe, the 27th. I think that was Wednesday. And one of the things that came up in conversation was the district's mission statement, that the last part of it is productive citizens. And there's a question about why we use the word citizens, because, it could be very broadly, generally thought of as like members of a community, or it can have a really specific definition as a like official member of a, political region, country, city, that type of thing. And whether that word was necessary or what the intention was for that word, and maybe some clarification with that. And I think that was one of the main things. Also, so in previous board meetings, we've talked about having like definitions and things for an equity statement, or what those words mean, equity, and related concepts. And the city of Red Wing has some definitions that they've put together. So I meant to kind of get that from Michelle Lizey and have that in our packet, but I didn't get that far this week. But I will have it added that it might be something we want to consider is adopting the same definition so that we're working with the same terminology and language as the city. So I think those were the big things.
Thank you for pointing out the citizens phrase, because we serve all students regardless of their birthplace or their citizenship status or anything like that. And so if we can find a way to better reflect that on the educational plan, I think that's a good idea.
One of the ideas was to just take the word out entirely. The sentence works without it. But that would be probably something, just a topic of discussion for another day, but just something to consider.
Take the whole mission statement out and be.
No, just the word citizens.
Productive citizens,
Just take out citizens.
just take out citizens. Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Although then there's a question about whether, like the word productive, what that means. But citizens was more the one that was
Okay.
called into question.
Okay. Anything else? One thing I do want to ask is about the calendar committee. Did we adopt the calendar for next school year too?
Not yet.
So when does that calendar committee usually start up again?
We generally start in late fall.
Yeah.
But the last year or two, it's been a little crazy, so we did it in the spring. But we can re-engage that group anytime.
Okay.
Yeah, Jen Grove is leading it up now, so I'll contact Jen and just try to get the timeline.
Okay, that'd be great. Any other updates from any of our committees? All right, then the next thing is administrative report.
I just have a couple of things. First of all, the school district did advertise for a long-term substitute for the high school principal. We're hoping to hire someone in the next week or so, or at least offer employment. And then that term would last from approximately November 15th through at least March 1st. So we want some flexibility on both ends, but that's a rough timeline. We did have a question from a board member about the district's receipt of a grant for COVID testing. We did receive just over $146,000, which must be spent by the end of this fiscal year. The grant will pay for the purchase of test kits, postage to mail the tests, and additional time for the nurses and for our safety consultant to run the testing program. As an FYI, each test costs about $80 to $110, but well worth it because we want those results back as soon as possible, get the kids and staff members back to school when they're safe to do so. There was a question that was discussed at least one board meeting that has to do with transportation in Wakuda. We did, starting on the 27th of October, we did expand our transportation services for students living on Lakeview Drive to the right of the intersection along the lake there. One of the hangups was finding a driver to drive a van for a very short stretch of the road there. But first student did find a driver, and so that service was started on the 27th. So the van will transport kids either to another bus stop in Wakuda and then run some additional routes for the school district. Or if it is possible and makes more sense, they'll pick up kids along that road and then take them to the school to drop them off directly. Totally depends on how else we can use the van. We want to be as efficient as possible because the cost to operate the van is up to $380 per day. So we want to be able to use it to provide services for our special education kids, for our alternative learning kids, or maybe other district students who need transportation to either a school or to a bus stop. Paul Hartman did recommend changing how students can access the weight room in order to generate some money to update the facility on an annual basis. You can kind of see a description of that. Just a reminder is that it's open to all students, not just those students who are in sports. And the price is reasonable. And Paul will use that money to repair equipment, purchase additional equipment, those kinds of things. And then you can see the latest update for our future workshop topics, including in November, district communications, student achievement results, school improvement plans, and the world's best workforce report. A lot of those topics are kind of one and the same, and so we put them together as one report, and then we'll present that and discuss. Then you can see Pam will be setting up a board self-evaluation time, and we'll discuss the open meeting law, including serial meetings. That's been on the list for a while, but we'll get to that here soon. That's all I have.
Questions? Yes.
Yeah,
Terrence?
I'd like to go back to this Wakuda busing situation. Is there any reason, or I should say, is there, and I know we pay for student transport students. What would be the cost, and can we transport them in our own van with our own employees? Seems to me we could do that for a lot less than $380.
We could. We don't have enough staff members to fill our special education paraprofessional roles. And typically we could, in other settings, if we had enough staff there, we could use one of those paraprofessionals to provide that service. But we can't even fill those positions right now. Certainly if there was a van driver available, we could, certainly consider a change there with first student.
Sounds like a good retirement job for me.
That would be great. School board members can earn up to a certain amount per year, so you can stay on the school board and still serve in that capacity.
Just piggyback on that, on Mr. Derrick's thing. The 380 is for the day. It's not for the Wakuda cost. And then you use the word expanded transportation in your written report. We actually should be providing transportation for those students. It's not expanded. We just had to make up some type of alternative transportation for them because the buses had problems getting down there. So I don't know why it's stated expanded transportation.
Well, and just to be clear, we have been providing
Exactly.
transportation services all along. The issue was that students had to walk up to about 1.6 miles to reach the bus stop. And so that was the genesis of the complaint. And so that's why I used the word expanded, because we added, to that service. I'm not sure if that's the right word, but again, we have been providing the service, but now we're providing, better service for the kids on that one section of road.
Well, I don't think that's totally accurate because last May, we were still driving the bus down the end of the road, picking them up, dropping them off. 2 years ago, you were there, approved them to go all the way down to the road. For this reason, this year, they decided to stop up there. So we were providing that transportation. First student chose not to do it, so that's what got the whole issue going. So we were doing the transportation, they just stopped.
Yeah, and 2 years ago, of course, well, as you said, I was a supporter of having the bus go down Lakeview. There were issues over the last year or two in terms of having the bus do that service. For most of the road is wide enough for a bus to pass an oncoming vehicle. But there is a section that narrows quite a bit. Don't quote me on the width for sure, but I think it's like 13 or 14 feet wide in a certain part of it. And buses, I think, are about 12 feet wide. So there's no way that a bus
It can't
could.
be 12 feet wide. Many traffic lanes are only 8 or 10.
Yeah, again, don't quote me on the amount.
Semi width.
But I will tell you that I was on the road in that narrow section, and there's no way a bus can pass a car safely. Now, certainly in the summertime or early fall, a bus can go on the small gravel shoulder there, but it just isn't a safe passage there. But we did find a way to resolve it. We're providing the van service, and we can connect it with other needs of the district. Like I said, special ed kids, alternative learning kids, center kids. So it's at least not just one van for that one purpose. We're going to use it in other ways too. And we would love to have Arlen or anyone on the board help us out with some transportation.
There you go, Arlen, you're set for your retirement.
He just looks tired.
He looks excited to me, so.
Uh-huh. Thank you for that explanation. Any other questions about the administrative report?
So I had emailed today, not necessarily with the administrative report, but to ask about the enrollment numbers. So that Jackie sent out a report with that. Just with all varying things, like with the budget and everything, to look at what those numbers actually have been and the decline that we're seeing in it. So not really something that needs discussion, but it wasn't included in the board packet because to me today, as I was reading through the financial audit and that decline in enrollment and, how those numbers fluctuate and things like that. So we have it now to be able to reference.
Thank you. Yeah, that is a really good piece of information. Yeah.
I didn't open it up, but they're the same numbers we showed at the financial committee, so it was on the financial.
Okay.
It was
Yeah,
in
it
the financial.
was part of the 5-year projections we talked about in finance. Yep.
I think this is maybe like a expanded, there are more graphs than I remember seeing before, but maybe not.
Yeah, it might be more graphs.
Okay.
I might have narrowed the graphs a little bit. So this one got, the finance committee focused on projections. This document grabs the history as well, but it's up from the same report.
And thank you for that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Anything else for administrative reports? All right, then the next item on our agenda is the consent agenda that's listed in your board packet on 186. Does anybody have anything that they need to pull or ask a question about on the consent agenda? I'm seeing no changes, so I'd look for a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
So moved.
Anna made the motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Second by Jennifer. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? All right, motion carries 5-0. Donations and grants.
Yeah, I'd like to present two donations. Both are for the donation of face coverings to elementary schools. First of all, Kathy Johnson of Red Wing and the United Lutheran Church Social Concerns Committee. So thank you for those donations.
All right, so I am looking for a motion to approve the attached resolution accepting donations and grants.
So moved.
Motion made by
Second.
Anna, Mr. Bryant seconds. We need to take a roll call vote, so I will start with Mr. Derricks
Aye.
and Ms. Tift. Aye. Ms. Ostendorf,
Aye.
Mr. Bryant,
Aye.
and chair votes aye. That passes 5-0. All right, the approval of the social media policy.
And Robertson is part of the meeting tonight to answer any questions that may arise from consideration of approval of the social media policy. Once again, as we've discussed in past meetings, there have been questions about the appropriateness of some comments made on our district social media accounts. Very few are inappropriate, but there are some, and so we thought that we should develop a policy to determine when we can and should remove those posts. There have been some questions posed about the proposed policy. One has to do with removing or editing comments on Facebook pages that contain false information, and explain that the district will not edit comments. Instead, we would remove them, the comment entirely, if it contains false information. In addition, the district's official social media platforms are extensions of our classrooms. So we want to ensure that the platforms and pages and accounts tied to schools contain information appropriate for their age group. Legal counsel did review the proposed policy and made the recommendations about comments that contain false information or are off topic can be removed. Ann also explained that she does not review every social media post or comment because that would consume so much time of her regular day. However, she works with the social media contacts with each school and will also provide guidance and training as far as how and when to post, what to look for in comments, reactions to posts, when to share posts, and how media platforms are changing, among other things. So again, Ann is present to answer any questions from the board.
Any questions, comments? I don't think so. This is the third time that we've reviewed this. We've had a discussion 2 prior evenings to this, so Ann, do you have anything that you'd like to share about this, or are we ready to vote?
No, the only thing I would mention to you is that as the year goes on, this will be this, one component of the social media, the posting policy. There's things that you may want to consider down the road that would be added onto this or something like that. But otherwise, I think this is all set to go based on the feedback I've gotten from all of you.
I will move to approve the social media policy as presented.
Second. Motion made by Anna, seconded by Ms. Tiff. Do I have any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Carries 5-0. And Ann, thank you for drafting this and putting the work in that. I think it's needed. So we very much appreciate your work in this arena. Thank you.
Thanks, Ann.
All right, future topics and upcoming meetings. We'll have a little bit of a recess here tonight, and then at 7 o'clock, we're going to have a workshop on learning about Superintendent Evaluation, and we'll be having a speaker join us from the Minnesota School Boards Association. So she'll be here shortly, virtually. All the other committee workshops are listed in the board packet. Does anybody have anything else that they'd like to highlight coming up? Our next school board meeting will be 2 weeks from today. Right? All right. Right? Anything else? All right, then I will take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Motion made by Anna, seconded by Jim. All those in favor say aye. Anyone opposed? All right, we are adjourned at 6:42. We will reconvene at 7 for our workshop. Thank you, everyone.
Jim beat you by 2 minutes still.
This?
It was the shortest meeting, so
Can you pull me back up there?
Should have
it was close.
Yeah, I can
gone
rejoin.
faster there.
Wait, go on. I just want to see where I'm lined up at.
Good evening, everybody. This is Monday, November 1st, 2021, and it's a special school board workshop for evaluations this evening. I will call the meeting to order at 7:02. In terms of roll call, we have Chair Derek, Chair Tift, Chair Bryant, not Chair, Board Member Derek, Member Tift, Member Bryant, Member Ostendorf, myself, and we have 2 board members missing this evening. One agenda item, and that is the superintendent evaluation. It's one of the most important things we do as a school board together, and so I've consulted with Barb at the Minnesota School Board Association, and I've asked her to join us this evening to share her expertise and wisdom on this topic and help us with a discussion on how we should proceed our evaluation moving forward. I'll just I'll give you the mic, and thank you very much for joining this evening.
Great, thank you so much. I'm really glad to be here. Can everyone hear me okay? Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. Wonderful.
Superintendent Anderson is also here with us. I apologize.
Great. Okay, thank you. Well, thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. My name is Barb Doran. I'm the Director of Leadership Development and Executive Search at MSBA. I work exclusively in the areas of Superintendent Search and Superintendent Evaluation. And the topic for tonight's workshop is Superintendent Evaluation. I'm anticipating this will last approximately 1 hour. I do have more time available, though. If you have questions, I am more than happy to go longer than we had planned. And I'd like the workshop to be fairly informal. Just please ask questions throughout. Let me know if there's something that I'm not quite clarifying for you, and interrupt me, wave your hand or something so I can ensure that I'm answering all of your questions as we go. Before we start, I do have one piece of advice for everyone, and it's especially for those of you who have dogs. And it relates directly to what my eye might look like. I'm not sure on your screen, but I've been told it's still not very good looking, but it's bright red. So the only advice I would give you is if you are playing tug of war with your dog, do not do it at eye level, because if you're pulling really hard and they let go, your knuckle will fly back into your open eyeball and you will have a bright red eyeball for at least a week. And we'll see where it goes from there. But there's an explanation for it. I just know folks think it looks kind of funny right now. So just be careful with your dogs out there, but that is why it looks red, and I'll try to only work with this eye if I can. So with that, I would first appreciate a brief round of introductions. Board members, if you could give me your name and how long you have served on the Red Wing Public Schools School Board. We also want to ensure that you get your CEUs for attending an MSBA workshop. So I want to jot down who is here with us this evening and ensure you get credit for attending the training session. So I'm not sure, Pam, how you'd like to start doing introductions, but I'm going to jot down names and how long you've served.
We'll just start to my.
I'm Anna Ostendorf, and for January 1st.
Welcome.
Mr. Bryant?
Jim Bryant. This is finishing up my 3rd year on the board.
Third year. Thank you.
Harlan Derricks, I don't remember how long, it's been a long time. I'm finishing my 7th year, or 2 months, and I'll be starting my 8th year, so.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm Jennifer Tift, and this is my 1st year along with Anna.
Okay, welcome as well.
Welcome, Barb. I'm Karsten Anderson, the superintendent, and this is my 7th year.
How many years? I'm short. Sorry, you shorted out again.
Just starting my 11th year.
11th year. Thank you.
And I'm Pam Rowe, and I'm just finishing up my 5th year.
Okay, great. All right, thank you very much. I do appreciate that, and we will get you in the database as having attended the workshop tonight so you can ensure to have that credit. What we're going to cover tonight is really threefold. The first is a PowerPoint presentation, and Lisa is going to run that from me on your end. Thank you very much, Lisa. That's going to cover the generalities of superintendent evaluation, what a process is that we recommend, why we do it, some of the ups and downs, pitfalls, obstacles, and opportunities that lie in superintendent evaluation. So that overview is the first part of the evening. The second part is going to be discussing goals, and I know that you have established 4 primary goals for your superintendent, so we'll cover that as well, and we'll reinforce some of the things around that goal, those goals. And then finally, we're going to be speaking about standards and elements, which I think standards and elements are a very underutilized tool in terms of superintendent evaluation. So we're going to close the evening with some standards and elements conversation, and I actually have a handout that you're going to receive as we discuss that. So those are the 3 big things that I'd like to accomplish over the course of the next hour. And again, please interrupt me and make sure that you are asking all questions that you would like to this evening. So we'll dive right in. Lisa, if you would be able to screen share the PowerPoint, please, we'll get started with that. All right, thank you. And can everyone see that okay? From your end? Wonderful. Thank you, Lisa. So really, when we're talking about superintendent evaluation, we are talking about developing goals and expectations for the board team, for the school board members and the superintendent together. It's really important that the evaluation process proceed as a conversation. There should not be any surprises at the evaluation sessions, whether you do them mid-year or year-end or several times throughout the year, because conversation and communication is crucial to the evaluation process. One of the things that we often hear is, well, they're just not living up to my expectations. And our question always is, have you shared your expectations with them? And you'd be surprised how often that has not been shared with the superintendent, so that they are at a significant disadvantage if the expectations have not been made clear from the start of the evaluation period. So we're going to be talking a lot about board team tonight and having you work together to establish the process. Again, we've already got goals written down, but also discussing those standards and elements as a board team and working together for the benefit of the kids in the district, because really that's what it always comes down to. Next slide, please. You might recognize these as board members. These are the cornerstones, which are the standards for school board members. All of these things tie into your performance and your expectations of you as a board member. So you have conduct and ethics, vision, structure, accountability, and advocacy and communication. And there's more information amongst all of those. If you've been through the phase training, I'm sure you've talked about the standards, and you can also find them on our website. What I want to highlight tonight is the part of those standards which tie directly to superintendent evaluation. For example, under conduct and ethics, the standard says that that includes respecting and advocating mutual understanding of the roles and responsibilities of board members and superintendent. That's embedded in the standard regarding conduct and ethics. Now, similarly, under accountability, it says that it includes evaluating the superintendent on clear and focused expectations. So it is something that should be woven into the fabric of what is expected of you as school board members. Next slide, please. Then we'll compare and contrast those to the standards for superintendents. And there are 8 standards, which we'll talk about more later when we talk about standards and elements. But when superintendents have to go through their education and have the credentialing to become a superintendent, these are based on the competencies which superintendents must meet in order to get licensed as a superintendent in Minnesota. So for superintendents, the standards are governance, finance, communication, operations, HR, teaching and learning, student support, and ethical and inclusive leadership. So they have 8 standards, which we can drill down into later with the elements that comprise each of those standards. Now, looking at these 2 columns, they're both sets of standards. One is for you as board members, and one is for your superintendent as the superintendent. What do you notice when you look at these 2 lists? There is a difference between them that most folks will recognize. And I'm just going to tell you because it's probably easier. If I was there in person, I know you would be wildly waving your arms trying to get my attention that you know what it is. When you look at these 2 lists, you'll notice that the board standards are more about governance, high-level oversight, and the superintendent standards are more about management, all right, the operations and the management of the district. So those are the two big differences in standards, and those tie directly to the next slide, which is the board governance model. And all of you have seen this, I'm sure. It's a big part of MSBA's phase training and all of the trainings we do on board teamwork. When you look at the governance model, right in the heart of it, right in the center, it says student achievement for all. That is the heart of it. Again, every district wants the best for their students. And so that's that heartbeat right there. Now, running through the middle, you'll see the line going horizontally. That's what we like to call the fence. All right. So the fence for the board is on the top of this diagram, and the fence side for the superintendent is on the bottom half. So for example, the school board governs. Your job is to establish things such as expectations, the strategic plan, the parameters of the district. You establish those big picture items, right? You also adopt a lot of things. You adopt policies, you adopt the budget, you adopt contracts and approve contracts. So that's your role as a governing body. Now, the superintendent, then, if you continue around the wheel, needs to develop plans, develop procedures, develop the staff. That's a management role, and that's what the superintendent's responsible for. They also need to implement much of what the board has decided. So they have to implement procedures and policies and plans that have been designed by and approved by the board. But the superintendent's job is to implement those things. And then the superintendent also needs to monitor all of those things, monitoring plans, procedures, policies, and staff, right? So that's the management part of the wheel. And then you get back over into the governance side with the board, and the board needs to evaluate much of what the superintendent brings to them. They need to evaluate the outcomes from the plans, policies, procedures, things such as that. They also need to evaluate the board and the superintendent. Now, tonight we're talking superintendent evaluation, but we also really encourage school boards to evaluate themselves. I don't know if any of you have had the opportunity to participate in the board self-evaluation, but that's a really nifty tool that MSBA provides, and you can get more information about it on the website. I believe the self-evaluation tool is free of cost for a board to do that, and you get results back showing you where your strengths and opportunities for growth are. And then if you want to dive much deeper into it, you can certainly talk to Gail Gilman at MSBA about that. But evaluation is an important part of your work, and then back up to establishing more procedures, policies, things like that. When you are a board team, we always tell you, you are welcome to sort of peek over the fence. Board, you can peek over into the superintendent's realm. And the superintendent, you can peek over into the board's realm. Please, though, do not leap over that fence, because when you do, you get into situations where it's an unhealthy board dynamic. You do have specific roles and responsibilities that you should stay in your lane. All right. Whenever we have a district that's really struggling and they say they have some board dysfunction or they have tenuous relationships with their superintendent, so often we can trace it back to this board governance model and people leaping over that fence into the other person's or board responsibilities and arena. So this isn't a surprise to you, but I want to make sure that you take a look at this because it is critical to having a healthy team. The next slide talks about aligning your goals. All right, so integration of your goals toward a common plan. Now that big red box, the school district strategic plan, includes beliefs, mission, vision, your district goals. Now those might be 3 to 5 years out. All right, so those are big picture goals. It's your beacon. It's where you're headed with your strategic vision for your district. Picture an umbrella, if you would, as part of that red box, because that umbrella really overlies all of the other goals that we're talking about. The green box and the blue box, it's the superintendent goals and the school board goals. Now, the difference between the red and the blue and green is that the blue and green tend to be goals that are 1 year at a time. All right. It's best if the board sets goals for itself and the superintendent sets goals for themselves along with the board that are no more than 1 year out, and also no more than, we tend to say, 2 or 3 goals. Because really, when you think about everything the board's responsible for and everything the superintendent's responsible for, it's too much from performance evaluation purposes to grade them on. All right, no one is perfect at everything, and the plate is simply too full. So we ask boards, for example, to prioritize goals for the superintendent. So you winnow it down to a more fair evaluation metric, 2 to 3 goals. However, sometimes if it's a really complex goal, we've had boards set 1 goal with their superintendent. And if they're very achievable, relatively simple goals, maybe you establish 4 or 5. But for the most part, we say 2 to 3 goals. And then the board themselves should set some goals to support the superintendent. This is where I always say a good example is the accountability around a referendum, for example. Let's say that a board and superintendent team decide that one of the goals for the superintendent that year is to create a marketing campaign for the upcoming referendum, talking points and those sorts of things. They want to be sure that as a board, they set, for example, a board could set a goal to memorize the talking points. We set a goal to memorize the talking points provided on the referendum. Another goal might be to agree to appear at the informational sessions, whether it's coffee Q&As or informational sessions at the district, to be available to come speak on the referendum on behalf of the board. So the more the annual goals can align between the board and the superintendent, the greater chance of success for everyone to help meet those goals. All right, so this just makes sense. You're looking for vertical alignment with where the district's going and then what you are doing on an annual basis to help get there. Are there any questions if I pause for just a moment? Does anyone have anything thus far? No? Okay, next slide, please. Thank you, Lisa. So I'm going to touch briefly on evaluation do's and don'ts. I'm going to focus on the do's. For the most part, the don'ts are just the flip side of that same coin. So when you're talking about a performance evaluation process, the first thing you want to do is to establish one. All right. Early in the year, you should agree on how we're going to conduct our performance evaluations, what will be included, when will we meet, who will be present, just what process will you use. Now, the one we're talking about tonight is largely based on this booklet, which you all have in front of you. It's goals and standards-based process, but there are many other ways to do evaluations. This is MSBA's recommendation, and we developed it in partnership with MASA, the Superintendents Association. So we're very comfortable with this process, and yet local control is real important to MSBA, and if there's a process a district wants to use, you certainly have the flexibility and the authority to craft the process that works best for you. Another do is to collaborate. Work together on this. When you're coming up with the goals or standards and elements, please, board members, include your superintendent in those conversations. In order for it to be a fair and balanced process, you need their input. Keep in mind that you as board members most likely have never been a school superintendent. Sometimes, every once in a while, there's a former superintendent on the board, but for the most part, you do not know what it takes to serve as a superintendent on a daily basis. And so you need to include them in the conversation to ensure the goals are reasonable and are achievable. So collaborate, communicate, clarify your expectations as much as possible, but do work together because, again, you're a board team. Using agreed upon ratings and written feedback is very important as well. Usually written feedback comes more into play with the year-end summative evaluation, not necessarily a mid-year, but it certainly can. But know in advance what sort of scoring system or rubric or what sort of rating system you're going to use. So again, there's no surprises. And having written documentation of the good as well as the not so good is an important part of clarifying expectations and then putting those things in the personnel file for the superintendent to refer back to. And you're going to want to have that stuff as a board because should things not go well, you want to have documentation in the file to help you decide whether or not to have another conversation about a contract. Or if things are going very well, you want to be able to refer back to those things as well when negotiating a new contract. And a superintendent likewise wants that in the file because they want to know where they stand as they may look for other opportunities or they may want to negotiate a new contract with the existing board. So written feedback is important. Now, the fourth bullet about combining it into one final evaluation summary is really important. The thing that we always want to make sure is very clear is that the superintendent does not work for 7 individual people. You have no individual authority as school board members. What you have is authority as a board, a single entity. So that's who the superintendent works for, is the board. They don't work for you as 7 individuals. And I think that's the strength of a school board, really are the different perspectives that you bring to the table, the different lenses you have through which you view life and the experience that you have. That's really important to coming up with the best solution possible for the kids in your district. And yet, when the rubber meets the road, it is a matter of speaking with one voice. So there is a consistent message and there is one entity to whom the superintendent is going to report and who is going to evaluate them. And then finally, allow enough time. These conversations can take a couple of hours. Mid-year evaluation, year-end can take a couple of hours. Please don't rush through it. Otherwise, I think you're doing a disservice to everyone who's on the board team. And really, 2 of the most important jobs for you as board members is to hire the superintendent and to evaluate the superintendent. And hiring someone takes a long time and a lot of effort. Likewise, evaluating someone should take a lot of time and effort just to ensure you're doing the best you can. So those are the do's and don'ts. Upper right corner, don't appoint an evaluation committee. I know you're busy, and I know that there are sometimes personnel committees that want to take on the responsibility of evaluating the superintendent, but it goes back to the fact that they work for the full board. And if only a part of the board is conducting the evaluation, that is not representative of you as a unit. So really, truly, do not delegate this and try to do it from a full board perspective. All right, any questions on do's and don'ts? Am I going too fast or are we okay?
All good.
All right, great. Next slide, please, Lisa. And here is the 3-step process. The first bullet point takes the most time, to establish goals and select standards. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. All right, so we'll get into that here in a bit. Now, to schedule and hold the mid-year and schedule and hold the year-end evaluation, I know from the history in Red Wing that you have done these regularly and you have them on the calendar, which is great. Too often we see school boards that say, yes, we're going to evaluate the superintendent this year. Well, things keep turning up. And you know what it's been like the last couple of years. There are always bigger fires you need to deal with. And so they keep kicking the can down the road farther and farther in terms of having the conversation around performance evaluation. Pretty soon the year has expired and they never even met about it. They had the best of intentions, but they didn't have anything on the calendar. So we really encourage everyone to put dates on the calendar and then stick with those. Even if they're 6 months or 11 months out, get the date on the calendar so everyone knows when it will be and you have it already booked so that you don't make other plans or double book yourself with board meetings on those evenings. All right, so we're going to go through the booklet here in a little bit more detail, but I want to finish the slide presentation first. Lisa, one more slide. Oh, we have more than one more slide left because I have to talk about open meeting law and data privacy. It wouldn't be an MSBA session if I didn't talk about the open meeting law, right? Well, I have to tell you that superintendent evaluation is one of the very few times you can go into closed session. So we encourage you to do so. Given the opportunity to close the session and have a very frank and open conversation between board members, which includes the superintendent, who is a non-voting member of the board, we suggest that you do so. All right, because you don't get that chance very often in the state of Minnesota. That being said, if a superintendent wants the evaluation conducted in the public and in an open meeting, you must do that. That is the superintendent's prerogative to choose if they want the evaluation done in the public. All right, so if that's the case, that's what the board must do. Keep in mind as well that all of the information discussed, especially if you're in a closed session, involves private personnel data. So you cannot divulge what was shared in that workshop. Now, the board does need to provide a summary overview to share at the next open meeting of the board, whether it's a regular meeting or a special meeting. You have some time as board chair to provide a summary, but it's a very high level summary. It doesn't get into the weeds. It doesn't get into the ratings or the rankings that the board gave the superintendent. That is private data. So be very careful when you do the summary, and there's an example of it in the back of this booklet, that you're not violating any data practices laws with the summary that you do provide. But you at least must give the audience or the public a reasonable amount of information for them to ascertain what occurred in that closed session. All right. Any questions on open meeting law or data privacy? All right. Moving on. Next slide, please, Lisa. And we love the 3 C's: communication, collaboration, and clarity. Again, this is what it boils down to: regularly communicating your expectations, making sure that you're working together on it toward common goals, and being very, very clear. All right. The worst thing that happens to us is with 6 months left in a contract with a superintendent is we get a call from a board chair or other members of the board that say, you know, we're just not very happy with our superintendent and the contract deadline's coming up. So what should we do? I guarantee you that our first question is going to be, have you conducted performance evaluations over the course of the contract? And if a board says no, therein lies the problem. Now, I know that you've been doing them regularly in Red Wing, so kudos to you on that. There are many, many boards that have not done that, and it almost always leads to misunderstandings, miscommunications, ineffective, low-performing board teams. And so I'm really glad to hear what you've already done there, and I'm excited to help you build on it moving forward. The last slide is just, do you have any questions on the general overall process? Anyone have questions on that?
I'm kind of wondering about,
You faded out, I'm sorry. I heard I have questions on, and then it went away.
the final combined. You hear me?
Okay, there I did.
To the speaker there.
So the idea that it works.
Oh man, you're shorting in and out. I'm so sorry. I don't hear anything now.
Let me move over here.
Perfect.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Much better, thank you.
So the idea that the superintendent works for the 7 of us as a collective versus, you know, any one of us individually, and that information compiled. So like, you know, we've sent out, or in previous, one evaluation I was part of, there was a survey, we responded to it, and then those responses were kind of compiled. But we didn't really have an opportunity to discuss those responses with each other because of closed meeting, or so should the board have a meeting before we present our results to the superintendent with the 7 of, I mean, how do we create a document that says what our evaluation findings are without breaking open meeting law? Or I'm just
That's
kind of.
Great question. Yeah, we get asked that a lot. So what we would suggest is that a couple of weeks before the evaluation session, the board chair sends out some sort of form, you know, scale of 1 to 5 or something to evaluate the superintendent, return those to the board chair. And then the board chair they have a couple of options. They can compile an average to bring to the closed session to share that says, on this topic, all 7 board members, we averaged a 3.2. And on this one, we averaged a 2.6. So that's one option. And I'll get to your question about talking about it. And then the other option is for the board chair to bring forth the actual numbers that of 7 board members, we had a 4, a 3, a 4, a 2, a 4, and a 1 or something. But you don't put names with them because you don't want starting to be individuals as such per se. But you really should have a conversation about it. And you're right, you can't do that in open session. So you can go to closed session. Now the superintendent joins you. It's possible that the superintendent at their prerogative can also say, hey, you know what? Maybe you as a board want to talk for a while without me in the room, and I'm fine with that. So is it okay with you if I excuse myself for 20 minutes or so? They can do that. And then that allows the board themselves to meet in closed session, knowing, however, that they have every right to be in there and to listen to the entire conversation the board has amongst yourselves. You cannot exclude them from it. We see very often though a superintendent saying, you know, I did a self-evaluation, you've seen it. I'm more than happy to duck out for a bit and let you as board members, you know, discuss, and then I'll come back. But you can't require them to leave the closed session. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, thank you for asking.
If we're giving, in addition to those numerical, if we have comments on there, what is the best way to compile those without it becoming like a serial meeting or something like that, but still be able to give that feedback?
Yeah, great question. Again, that's usually something that lands in the lap of the board chair. And then when they have all of the comments, their role is really to look at all of those comments and then summarize what trends came through. The other option is to give all of the raw data to the board. I'll just tell you, sometimes it can be overwhelming, and it's much more efficient if the board chair can summarize it and identify, these are the 4 salient points that came out of the comments you all made around goal 1. And then you have a conversation and you'll recognize your own comments and some of what they've created. But it is easier to, try to synthesize it down into something that the board can talk about versus the raw data. And you get bogged down, you get into the weeds way too much. And remember, you're a governing board, so you do want to be big picture if possible. So a lot is on the shoulders of a board chair in the evaluation process. Did that help?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Other questions on the general process, and this will start to make a lot more sense, I think, as we get into the booklet a little bit more. Okay, so, go ahead. Did someone have a question?
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, so if we could no longer use the PowerPoint, thanks so much for your help with that, Lisa. I am not adept at screen sharing from my end, so I really appreciate it when someone in the district is able to do that for me, so thank you. So if you would pull out the booklets, I'm going to walk you through a couple of things in here and highlight, again, some high-level stuff. Now, when you go through this booklet, again, I'm going to reiterate that we did create the process in combination with MASA. So we vetted it, we tested it. The Superintendents Association and the School Boards Association both agree that this is a fair and a balanced process. However, you have room to customize it. So within the first couple of pages, I'm not going to read everything, but when you take a look at pages 3 through 7, it talks about the rationale for doing performance evaluations. It talks about the benefits of doing them. Now, one of the things that I think is most common is that people often don't recognize how evaluations have changed in the last 10 years. I think there was an expectation years ago that a performance evaluation, whatever industry you were in, not just in education, but whatever industry you're in, a performance evaluation is one of those gotcha opportunities where it's like, okay, we're going to evaluate you and you're going to catch the superintendent or whatever employee you're evaluating in a scenario where they're just not up to snuff. So it's sort of this opportunity to make a black mark and put it in the personnel file. That is no longer the case. That is the old school way of doing evaluations, and it really was not very productive. It set up a lot of adverse relationships between employer and employee when talking about performance expectations because it tended to be negative. Here's what you have to improve upon. Here's what you're doing wrong. All those kinds of things. And it cannot be a constructive relationship if that's all you're hearing. Now, over the last 10 years, evaluations have turned into this conversation where it's about mutual expectations. It's about working together for the benefit of the district or the mission of the organization or whatever it might be. As a team, you have a much greater chance of success if you are treating it as a collaborative effort and not a gotcha opportunity. That's not constructive. So you'll see in here some of the rationale about why you want to evaluate objectively and fairly and all the good things that can come from it. You'll see a suggested timeline on page 5 and 6. And keep in mind that this process can really be adapted to whatever timeline a district wants to follow. Many districts follow the fiscal year, and that's what we usually suggest is a July to the end of June. But there are other districts that follow the calendar year, and that works just as well. So do whatever fits your district. All right, this is not written in stone. It's for you to adapt to fit the needs of what works best for you. So those are the general overviews. And I don't want to spend too long on it, but starting on page 10, I do want to talk about these standards. Okay. So goals and standards are a two-pronged approach to the same thing. So that's why we want to incorporate both in performance reviews, goals and standards and elements. So goals tend to be, it's the verbiage, the language around something. So you might have a goal that says, craft an effective marketing campaign for this year's upcoming referendum or something like that. Or work with the board to create a balanced budget. anything like that, but it's sentences, usually maybe 2 sentences, maybe 3 sentences about the goal that you want the superintendent to reach. All right. So it's more for, I don't know if it's left brain or right brain, but goals tend to be language. So people who have the side of the brain that is predominant in terms of creativity and those sorts of things, they love goals. They love the linguistics of it. They like the semantics, and that does work very well. Sometimes goals can be a little squishy to measure though, because, if you say an effective marketing campaign, well, what does that exactly mean? And so if you as a board member are evaluating a superintendent, 2 board members sitting next to each other might disagree about what is an effective marketing campaign because it's open to interpretation. There's a lot of nuances to goals, and they're fine and they can be very effective. They are not, however, the only way you should evaluate a superintendent. You should also accommodate the folks who really predominantly use the other side of their brain, which is more the analytical side. And that's where standards and elements really come into play. So here are the 8 standards, 1 through 8. We already talked about those briefly, but within each of those, you can drill down into what's called elements. And the elements then have expectations tied to them in a rubric, which takes the emotion out of evaluating a superintendent. All right, so this is where it's going to start to click. Why don't you turn the page to page 12 and 13. On page 12 are the 7 standards. Page 13 is the 8th standard. And then you see the accompanying elements, all right, with each standard. So again, we're just going to slice and dice it deeper just to get to what we're really trying to figure out. So there's no nuance anymore. We're going to very specifically in black and white say this is what's expected. Now, within the standard for the governance team, you have 5 elements, from roles and responsibilities down to school board questions and development. All of those elements connect to governance. School district finance, there are also 5 elements, and so on and so forth. Within communication, there are 6. So for every standard, you can go a little bit deeper and identify a specific element. Now, for evaluation purposes, we recommend that a district chooses 2 standards, no more, because again, when you look at everything, if you read through these elements, it can be very overwhelming. And if a superintendent is going to be evaluated on every single element for every single standard, that is completely unfair. You are setting up your superintendent to fail if you expect them to perform at a high level on everything in the standards and elements. It's too big. Okay, so keep reasonableness in mind and make sure that you are not overburdening someone with expectations that you simply cannot expect them to meet. Now, where this is going to make sense, I'm going to do a hypothetical for you real quick. Let's say that you as a board had voted on standards at the start of your evaluation year, and you chose standard 2 and 3, finance and communication. Those were what were the priorities, knowing that all 8 are important. Those 2 were the priorities for your district. You would then select 2 elements within each of those. So hypothetically, if you selected school district finances, and then you all took a vote, and you must include the superintendent in this vote. So if you're a 7-member board, with the superintendent's vote, there's 8 of you. All right, there's 8 of you that get to help determine the elements. So let's just say you pick the first 2, budget development and financial statements. And then you did the same thing and took a vote on communication. And I'm going to pick the top 2 again, relationship with the community and engagement. Now, let me know if I'm going too fast. I'd like you to turn to page 15. Yes.
This is evaluation, but you're giving him a say, or her, give him or her a say in what?
I'm sorry, Jim, you're shorting out and I'm only getting every 3rd word.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, that's perfect. Thank you.
Just a question on, you asked us evaluation on the superintendent, but then he or she gets a say in what are the elements of each of the 2 or 3 or whatever you pick.
Mm-hmm.
Normal?
Yes, very normal, because when you think about it, with 7 members on the board and 1 superintendent, there's 8 voices on the board team. chances are that the selections that the board makes, the 7 members of the board, will weigh more heavily than the one voice of the superintendent. But you shouldn't exclude them from that conversation because it's their day-to-day livelihood. And again, you're not in those shoes, so you don't know what is most applicable to those goals and those standards. So yes, please include them, but with 7 board members and 1 superintendent, the voice of the board will be the majority of that selection. Did that answer your question? Okay. All right, thank you. So if you're looking at page 15 now, I'm going to go back to your hypothetical work as a board. You selected standard 2 as school district finances being a very important part of the upcoming year. You also selected element 2A and 2B, budget development, maintenance, and financial statements. So when it comes time to evaluate your superintendent, the superintendent has a very clear roadmap of what those expectations are, as do you as board members. So for example, in budget development and maintenance, if the superintendent wants to be highly effective, what they're going to strive to do is to engage in timely budget planning and actions that consider current and long-range information and data, etc. It's right here in black and white. That's what you need to do in order to receive a 4. All right. Now, if you sort of slide down 3, 2, or 1, what happens when evaluation time rolls around? And in this case, it is only the board members evaluating the superintendent. Now, the superintendent can do a self-evaluation and compare it to what the board says, but they are separate at this point. If the superintendent's budget knowledge is limited and the budget is developed and managed without taking into consideration the current needs of the district, well, you have to give them a 1. All right, it's very clear what is expected of your superintendent. Similarly, with financial statements, they would know early on that if they provide a constant flow of budgetary and/or financial information and discussion of the ramifications of those changes, they deserve a 4. And if you go down the line at the end, they're ineffective if they do not report financial information to the board other than an audit. And what this does, and this is one of the things that was really important to MASA and MSBA, is that this is a clear roadmap for you to fairly evaluate your superintendent. Because, for example, sometimes personalities just don't mesh. All right, school boards and superintendents are under a great deal of stress, and they have different ways of approaching challenges. So sometimes there's just oil and water, or there's personality clashes, or there's old grudges that are still there. With this roadmap, for example, if you simply don't care for your superintendent and the personalities do not align with your own personality, you still must give them a 4 if they have done what this element says they should do. Set aside your personal feelings and give them what they deserve. Similarly, if you and the superintendent are best buddies, everything is sunshine and roses, you think they're a phenomenal superintendent, but when you get down to the details of performance, if the superintendent, whom you like a great deal, has very limited budget knowledge and doesn't take into consideration your district's needs, well, I'm sorry, I don't care how much you like them, you have to give them a 1. So it removes emotion from the process. And that has been one of the biggest advantages of using standards and elements, is that it no longer is sort of open to interpretation. It's right here. Now, if you turn to the next page, for example, the communications standard, standard 3, hypothetically, if you picked 3A and 3B, page 16, the very next page is communication and community relationships. If they have no relationships with the public and private sectors, I'm sorry, that superintendent's going to get a 1. If, however, they've built and sustained productive relationships with public and private sectors, etc., you must give them a 4. That is simply the way that evaluations are done fairly. All right, so it starts to make sense. Now, when you page through this booklet, holy smokes, there are a lot of elements. You know, there's those 8 standards, which maybe didn't look like too much when you were looking at the list of 8 in the PowerPoint. But when you start to look at all of the elements and a 4-point rubric for every single element, for every single standard, it can be overwhelming, which is why we say, please narrow down your expectations to maybe 2 standards and 2 elements within each. Now, I know that you are well into your evaluation year because I believe you do it on the calendar year. Is that right? Okay.
Yes.
So I took the liberty of looking at the 4 goals that you have already discussed, and I matched up, and I talked to Pam about it first. I matched up what I thought were the most appropriate standards and elements to fit those 4 goals. So there is a handout. If you could hand those out, Pam, I want to walk the board through that and get your feedback on it.
This is based on last.
All right, so in looking at the materials that I got in advance for the district, I saw that you had set 4 big goals for your superintendent's performance, and it was around equity planning, student achievement, recovery from COVID, and human resources. And I know that's going to sound familiar to all of you. So in that case, and this is a draft, but this is a suggestion that I would make for you. For example, goal 1, equity planning. If you apply the standard to that goal, I would suggest that it's ethical and inclusive leadership. And I would say element 8F is the one that would fit best. So you then look at 8F, equity plan implementation, and you can read what a 1, 2, 3, or a 4 would consist of. So I'll give you just a moment to read that. So that's my suggestion for your first goal around equity, if you choose to use standards and elements as part of your evaluation process coming up. The second goal in terms of student achievement, that was much broader. And so this is something I want to turn over to the board when I'm done talking here tonight and ask you to winnow it down, because in terms of the teaching and learning standard, there were 4 that could be applicable. A, staff development, B, school improvement, C, curriculum and instruction, and D, professional knowledge of teaching and learning. 4 is too many. All right, this is too much. I would say you should get that down to 2. And whether you want to try and do it tonight, board or not, or at another meeting is up to you. But I would say that the teaching and learning elements, there's 4 of them, and I would say no more than 2. So find a way to read the verbiage about how you'd evaluate them in those 4 areas and maybe winnow it down. So that could be a conversation the board team has, include the superintendent in that conversation. And goal 3, I'm going to jump ahead just for a minute to recovery from COVID. Now, COVID is so incredibly complex that it's just too big for me to find a standard and element that would be measurable to create a rubric for that. So I suggest that you don't use standards and elements, but I do think you should have a conversation around what is meant by recovery from COVID, and at the same time, recognize that much of that recovery from COVID might be out of your superintendent's control. All right, so when we talk about a fair process, I'm going to use that example of a referendum. I've had boards that want to say, all right, the goal of this year is to pass the referendum, pass that referendum. When it comes down to it, can your superintendent actually control whether the referendum passes or not? They cannot. That'll be up to the voters in your district. So instead, you want to craft the goal around that marketing campaign or informational sessions or something, because simply expecting them to pass the referendum is unfair. Likewise, COVID is so incredibly complex, and you're bringing in all sorts of distance learning, mental health, mandates for vaccines, masking, staff student recovery, staff shortages. It's too big to fault them for things that are out of their control. Now there are things within their control that tie to COVID. So I'd encourage you to just talk through and become realistic about what maybe 2, 3, 4 things are at the top of our list. When we say recovery from COVID, here's what we mean. And maybe that's already woven into the verbiage in your goal around that. Because again, I was looking at standards and elements. The goals that language side of things can still be perhaps where you talk about recovery from COVID. But the fourth one, human resources, I believe in talking to Pam a little bit, it sounds like element E makes the most sense there, hiring and staff development. So depending upon the performance of the superintendent, you should have a pretty clear roadmap about whether you would give them a 1, 2, 3, or 4. Now, I'm not going to say that with this roadmap, every board member will always rate the superintendent exactly the same, but it's going to be within 1 point. So for example, on human resources, I would say all 7 of you, if you read these and if you fairly evaluate them based on what's in black and white, you're going to have all 2s and 3s, or all 1s and 2s, or all 3s and 4s. You should not have 1s and 4s. All right, that's just too much room. And there's no way that 2 people see things that differently when it's laid out so clearly in this metric. So they should be close enough where your averages are going to be much closer together than if you are sort of doing a gut check and doing the evaluation based on how you feel the superintendent's doing. When board members start to sort of say, well, I just don't think it's going well. Well, what do you mean by that? Well, I'm just not feeling like it's effective. Well, what do you mean by that? So you have to kind of keep digging to see what someone means. And you want these things measurable enough, SMART goals, however you want to do it, that you aren't evaluating anyone based on your gut sense. You want to use a metric like this. So I've just talked a lot, so I'm going to shut up and let you ask me questions and or do whatever you'd like to conduct the rest of your business with tonight. But I would suggest these with the caveat that you winnow down the second one to no more than two elements. Okay, with that, I'm done for a while. So let me know what else I can do to help. Pam, I'll turn it back over to you.
Last questions? Ask. I'll go for the one. An achievement for the one that we need to.
Say, Barb, we're just asking about an achievement goal.
Okay, I heard student achievement goal, so I'm gonna just let you talk. Thank you, Karsten.
I'm over here by the owl since my voice doesn't carry very well. I'm sorry, you guys, my computer's not working very fast.
Where do we have those saved? Do you know?
Those are all, I don't know if they're saved in a, are they?
You would, well, that'd be in my
They're-
personnel file, but then
Yeah.
also the school board's website.
Yeah.
Okay.
After the meeting where they were shared with the public. I don't recall what meeting.
No, that's the thing.
I'm sorry.
I know where they are, but I can resend them because I sent them all to Barb.
Okay.
So one of the things, Barb, that I have a question on, because we're trying to do 2 things essentially. One is to evaluate the superintendent for this last year. So that's what we just handed out was, if we were going to go with the rubric, this is how we would do it based on last year's goals. But for me, it kind of feels a little bit like, well, it's putting the cart before the horse a little bit, because the superintendent didn't have this rubric to be able to say, okay, if I really want a highly effective score on this, I need to ensure comprehensive staff development plan, he hasn't had these rubrics to work off of to make sure that he was doing that. Do you know what I'm saying? I know we need a place to start somehow. So how would you recommend we evaluate this last year, and then we need to figure out what our goals and objectives are for next year? So how do we do both of those things?
That is a very good question. Typically, the standards and elements in particular would have been decided upon right away at the start of the evaluation year. So they have an entire year to work toward the expectations in the elements. So yes, at this point, I'd say barn door open or cart before the horse or whatever would make complete and utter sense. So if you choose not to use it as part of the evaluation process for this year, it really can set a very good tone for expectations for next year, whether it's calendar or fiscal year. So don't feel like you have to use the recommendations that I made. I think you need to, again, be very fair in what the expectations were and how they were explained, and that the board was unified in the expectations. And maybe this is something that's better suited for the coming year versus to wrap it up, because it's, in many ways, it's kind of late. It's like, oh, well, that's what I was supposed to be doing. No one ever told me that. So how can someone live up to the expectations if they don't know what they are? So yeah, I think that point is excellent, and that might be the best way to go for your board, is to use this as a way to develop a better process moving forward and incorporate it a little, but maybe not in its entirety for this year's year-end evaluation.
And so how would we evaluate these goals that we have listed from our last year's summary?
It's going to be what I would call squishy. I use that word a lot, because if the goals have been set and it's only been verbiage, sentences and such, well, that's going to mean a lot of different things to a lot of different board members, and maybe a lot of different things to the superintendent. So it's going to be trickier to use that as your only metric. And I would say it's not an ideal way to do it. And yet I applaud you for wanting to do it. Just keep in mind that it's not as clean cut as you want to use moving forward. So you may still use a 4-point scale, and maybe you as board members use the elements within the document I shared with you as a guide, but it's not necessarily the hard and fast, this is what a 1 is, this is what a 2 is, because you are so far into your evaluation year. I guess the only advice I could give you is please try to be fair. That's all I can say. And so right now the expectations, maybe if they were more wordy and less of a metric of some sort, it's going to be tougher to evaluate, because you're all going to be doing it from your gut in large degrees. It's open to interpretation.
Right.
So I don't have the answer for you. I would say please be fair and be very conscious of the messages you've been sending over the course of this past year. Did the superintendent have an opportunity to actually address the concerns, and or what were they? It's going to be squishy. Sorry, that's all I can say. It's up to the board to really figure out what's going to be best for you between now and the end of the calendar year.
So maybe advice that I hear you saying is, if this year currently right now, we take these goals that we have set, and maybe we just have a squishy discussion. We don't have a rubric that we've been working off of. And we don't want to redefine your rubrics, because that doesn't make sense. So if we choose to use the MSBA platform moving forward, then as a group, we discuss what goals we want to have for next year and hand out the rubrics right away to everybody, so we know right off the bat what the expectation is, and if you want to get a folder, what we expect for the next year.
I think that makes sense. It's always good to start off the evaluation year with really clear expectations, and really taking the survey, that should take 5 minutes. Someone can just dump it into SurveyMonkey. You know, here's our 8 standards. Here's the elements within each. Pick your top 2, pick your top 2. And it wouldn't take very long to tally the 8 votes to set that. You wouldn't want to have a long drawn out discussion about standards and elements, or you start to influence one another's opinions. So when you do take the survey about standards and elements, try not to have it be a long conversation where you're trying to persuade anyone of one thing or another. You may just want to take the survey cold, and whatever results come back, then you know where you're headed as a group, because it'll be a majority will rise to the top within each of the elements and standards.
Okay. Yep.
To have the verbiage of those goals. Like that first goal of equity planning, I think really aligns with 8F. So I think we could use the rubric, and with the caveat, like somewhere put a note in the summary or something that like the rubric was applied after the fact, so that you know, 5 years down the road, if, Karsten got a 2 on that, it's not like, oh, he knew all along that this was gonna be the expectation, but that there's some way of documenting that in there, but that way we can also get a feel for using it. I mean, I think that one ties really closely. When we look at that goal 2, it's not. So I think, again, you'd have to have more, caveats written into that, like, so people know that this is what the expectation, this is what was done in January, this is where we landed in November. And again, kind of that same thing for goal 3. Goal 4, maybe lines, I haven't looked at that one yet, so.
That's the human resources one?
Yeah, I think that one, reading it now, I think it pretty much matches up with 5E. But yeah, those goals 2 and 3 are a little more nebulous.
And I think, Anna, you made a good point there that these goals were set in June. So that was 6 months ago.
Yeah.
And perhaps we could go ahead with the evaluation so that we get that done. But at the same time, use that as a baseline for the next 12 months. Something like that.
Keep the same goals maybe?
Yeah.
What were the goals a year ago?
It's the same as these ones. But
Yeah,
I
it's
think
the same
because
one.
This was the evaluation in June for these 4.
We did a full evaluation last
October.
November, yep. These are the goals that we set last November. So goal 1 was equity planning. The district is committed to strengthening this area through the leadership and direction of the superintendent. An equity team has already been established along with the purchase of new inclusive curriculum. A long-term commitment to equity planning and implementation throughout the district is a priority. So that was goal 1. Wordy, squishy.
But we had goals a year ago we need to keep in mind as we go through this one. So we can't go and say, oh, we only did it 6 months ago. We did it a year ago.
Yes. And that's what we're evaluating him on now is the goals that we established a year ago.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I thought they were done in June. So
No, that was the midterm.
Yeah.
So then goal 2 was student achievement. An education plan is set to address the achievement issues the district faces. A robust directive to address achievement gaps is essential for the next year and beyond.
Why are we not evaluating them on those goals?
We are.
Okay.
That's what we're trying to figure out is,
Well, we'll just do a summary type of thing and do it another year from now,
no.
or 6 months from now.
So if you go back to that first goal, equity planning, in the
Yeah.
first page on here,
Yeah.
that's the rubric that best matched. Barb and I talked about this, and we thought that this element 8F, equity plan implementation, that was the best match of the current rubric that's in the booklet that we just got.
Okay.
So then for student achievement, what I just read, we had a harder time figuring out exactly which rubric we could use. We could use up to 2 of them. We listed 4 because they could fit under all 4 of them, but I didn't know which ones we really wanted to focus on this current evaluation. So read through that and see, is it 6A, 6B, 6C, or 6D? We should probably do no more than 2.
We only need to do 1, 2.
Or 1, correct. Recovery from COVID, that probably isn't going to be something that will fit into a rubric, so we'll have to probably have more of a discussion on that one.
I
But-
think maybe 7C or 7G might fit, but
7
it depends on what your 7C or 7G
or 7.
in this binder.
I like under student achievement, school improvement. That's what I like. I like that one.
For this last year or this coming year?
Coming year,
Yeah, I like this one moving forward for sure. I agree.
school improvement.
Yeah. I don't think it's something we can evaluate from this last year though, but I
No,
think moving
it should
forward
be.
would good.
You can be, and it could be going forward too. It's not evaluating now and going forward.
I think B and C fit the best for goal 2.
Yeah, I like C.
C,
B and C. Those would be my picks.
okay. So then,
My only question is, how much curriculum instruction does the superintendent do?
Well, I mean, it's in the
I'm just asking.
rubric.
I'm not arguing with you or disagreeing with you. I'm just asking.
well, it's pretty clear under that element 6C, ensures curriculum is in place.
Yeah,
It's aligned across grade levels, complies with state standards.
okay.
You know, I think it's pretty clear. You're right,
I'm not
he
arguing.
doesn't do that.
Just asking
But then for goal 4 with human resources, our goal was hiring practices need to follow a consistent procedure and match adopted policy. Attention needs to be given to the overall human resource plan with an overarching goal for organizational structure. And so Barb and I really thought standard 5E, the element E, made the most sense. You know, for a highly effective 4 rating, the superintendent follows the established plan for recruiting, hiring, supporting, inducting, developing, and retaining staff while keeping students' interests in mind. And then it goes down, you know, 3, 2, and 1. So if you want to try and use this rubric with your caveat, I really like Anna about, you know, this was adopted afterwards, and, you know, these are some of the things that we'll continue to develop and look at for the next year. I mean, we just have to figure out a starting place.
I think even if the rubric doesn't perfectly match and we have to include that caveat, I think it's better than having it just be discussion based. I mean, I think if we have the space to include comments, of course, so that the aspects that we may have had in mind for the goals that don't necessarily fit the rubric, you can still include those in there at this point. But I think having the rubric makes it a lot less.
Squishy.
Yes.
We're using your word, Barb.
Less squishy.
Squishy.
Barb's word.
Arlen,
I, looking through this, and I like the way some of this is laid out. I'm looking at goal 2, student achievement, and yes, I say, understand they should use one element, A, B, C, or D. Why don't we use all 4 of them and then combine them somehow? I think all of them have merit in that student achievement. I'd like to rate in each one of them somehow. And then you take the average score of all of them somehow by combining, instead of having 7, if all board members respond, 7 responses, you'll have 28 responses when you do all 4 of them. But I just wonder if it's possible to use all of them, because there's good points in other elements of the student achievement, but.
are you talking for moving forward next year?
No, I'm talking for this evaluation that we have here. As far as seeing these rubrics, when we set the goals, I don't agree with that. I think we set a goal that what we want, the way we did it, when you set each rubric ahead of time, then you're telling the superintendent to go to the goal. You're giving the test answers or how you're gonna rate before you get it all. Right. I'm not coming up with the right wording, but it's, to me, I think all these have merit. You wanna improve this. Well, all these things would work. Superintendent does the best in all these different areas. You put it together, right? I don't like giving the test rating or answer with the goal.
Well, I see it as setting out a very clear expectation, not necessarily the answer. Barb, would you have anything to comment about that?
Yeah, and thank you for that perspective, Arlen. I appreciate it. I do know there are folks that might see it that way. So I'm hearing what you're saying. For us, it goes back to expectations. And what do you mean when you say that? Now, I used to be a big fan of goals, and I love language. I really love language. And I think some of the goals that you've stated are really beautifully stated. For example, I'm just going to use one here that I read and went, oh, I like how that is stated. Okay, student achievement, goal 2. An education plan is set to address the achievement issues the district faces. A robust directive to address achievement gaps is essential for the next year and beyond. I think that is beautifully stated. I love education plan, robust, essential, next year and beyond. I think it's beautifully stated. For me, the problem would be, what exactly does that mean? Because the superintendent might read that and say, okay, I've got my marching orders, I know what they want me to do. And yet his interpretation of what an education plan is might be very different than what the board thinks an education plan is. All right, so it's like, okay, what is that? What are the achievement issues? So you'd want to be very specific about what achievement issues is it? Is it test scores? Is it graduation rates? What is the achievement issues you're facing? And then what is a robust directive? Robust is a very stretchy word. I mean, robust can mean anything. And then it's also looking next year and beyond. So keep in mind that the booklet that we put forth and using standards and elements and actually using goals is 1 year at a time. We really don't want you setting goals for your superintendent that are 3 to 5 years out. That's the job of the strategic plan and the big picture goals of the district. But these should be 1 year at a time. And then keep in mind, what can the board do to support the superintendent in achieving those 1 year goals? So as much as I love language, I think these goals aren't specific enough. They're very open to interpretation, and it makes it very difficult for your superintendent to read your minds and figure out what you're looking for with that kind of a goal. So you should keep it, because remember I said it's a two-pronged approach. It's the goals and it's the standards and elements. It's 2 ways of getting at the same thing. So the goal is the language, and it really resonates with some people. But then by winnowing it down to standards and elements, and I would say that 4 elements is too much, because you're just expecting too much. Even though you have the roadmap in front of you, they may or may not get there. It's almost like giving someone a, I want you to get from here to California. And then you don't tell them how to get there. They have to figure it out on their own. But if you give them a map that they can follow, they'll get there, but they might not get there as quickly or as efficiently as you want them to, but at least they know how you want them to get there. And that's what, I wouldn't say it's giving the answers to the test in advance. I would say it's giving them a map so they know what is expected to them. And I'll tell you, you give them this map, no superintendent's going to be solid 4s across the board. You just can't expect them to be good at absolutely everything. So there's a lot of room for interpretation still, even though you have a map. So I would say that it's not the way you see it, Arlen, but I certainly hear you and why you have a concern about it. I would suggest, though, that that's not necessarily the way it works.
Everybody's got their opinion.
You bet. You bet. And that's the strength of the board. And yet, ultimately, you do want to come to a unanimous decision of cohesion over what it is you expect. But you're right. The strength is your different perspectives and different opinions. Yep.
Well, Barbara, it sounds like we have some decision-making to do, but I'll let you go. If anybody else wants to ask Barb any questions before I sign off with her, respect your time and your night, and we'll try and hash this out a little bit more.
I just got a question. Can you hear me, Barb? Evaluations, you said changed a lot over the last 10 years. I don't know if you meant the superintendent evaluation, but what's your definition of evaluation? Evaluation.
Thank you. I was speaking in generalities. No matter what industry you're in, evaluations have changed from kind of that, we just say the gotcha opportunity, to a conversation about where are we going and how can we help you get there, so that we know exactly, it's that beacon and the rudder. Okay, so I always say districts need a beacon and a rudder both. The beacon is, where are you going? All right, it might be the district goals, but it also should be 1 year at a time goals for that superintendent. What's the beacon that I need to hit this year? But then the rudder is how you're going to steer yourself to get there. So what adjustments do you need to make? What course corrections? If, for instance, as a board team, the ground shifts under your feet like it did with COVID, I had boards that had the best laid plans for evaluations. They had goals, they had elements, they had everything. And then March of 2020 came. They had to throw it all out the window because they just needed to get through the spring of 2020. Everything changed. So holding the superintendent accountable to the course that they'd set considering what had changed, was very unfair. So they needed to put a pin in it and simply say, now with our new reality, what are we going to evaluate them on? Did we get through the year? Did we have distance learning in place? Did we retain our staff? I mean, whatever it was that you needed to evaluate on. So build flexibility in, please. Now, as far as what evaluations are, I would say, and this is a great question, I've never been asked this before, so thank you. I would say an evaluation is a tool that a board team uses to ensure that you're all on the same page about what's expected. And then you evaluate them on whether they met those expectations or not. And then that lays the foundation for the conversations about the next contract. So you want to have that documentation in place. We told you what we expected. We made it very clear. You did or did not meet it, which then means this. And I think that's across industry. You know, every industry really needs to have accountability built into the system. And this is just an accountability tool for school board teams.
So
Did I answer your question?
that was very long.
Okay.
So evaluation sounds like changed. Instead of evaluating the person's performance of months, now we're evaluating goals that we're evaluating.
I'm sorry, you're completely shorting out. I'm only getting every other word. I'm sorry.
You bring it over here. Ooh, it's coming. Yeah, you can get it.
You have to bring the computer over.
Right, the chair. Can you hear me now? Okay, so I'm going to talk real slow. Holding it in her hand here.
Okay.
So our value, long-winded explanation.
It's still happening. I'm so sorry.
Evaluations are now changing from.
Is the connection tight? I almost wonder if the connection's not tight. I'm so sorry. It's so frustrating that I am not hearing the question.
Okay.
Why don't you come over here?
There might be.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, that sounds good. Thank you.
It was Pam.
And I'll ask Phil.
No, some with our connection here. So I'm
Okay.
just, evaluations would seem to have changed then. We're no longer evaluating employees on the past year's job performance. We're evaluating them only on goals.
No, you're evaluating on their past performance for the goals that you set.
So what happens if something else happened that does not the we have that we want to evaluate them on?
I think what you asked, gosh, I'm so sorry. It's just not there. I think what you asked is what happens if the goals change and you're trying to evaluate them on the past performance? I'm really sorry to not hear the full question.
Talk some other time. Thank you.
That would be great. Feel free to give me a call if you'd like to. That might be easier with a phone call. But yeah, performance evaluations are meant to evaluate the performance of the past year. During that entire year, though, it's incumbent upon the school board to keep expectations clear so that people know what you expect of them. So when you evaluate them, there's no surprises. Nobody should be surprised if it's a poor evaluation or a stellar evaluation, because you've been communicating about goals and objectives really over the course of the year. All right, so that I think is what it is. You are evaluating performance without question, but their performance is tied to the goals you've set for them. How do they perform on that goal or that goal? And then the standards and elements fit in.
I think also is if we have in an area that we weren't in a goal, how do we capture that? Sense?
Are you asking me, Pam? Because I heard less than half of that.
Oh,
Just give her-
we'll call you.
Okay. All right. So with that, I think you have a lot to think about. I want to thank you for your commitment as a board team to the evaluation process. You are light years ahead of many boards that simply don't talk about it. We've had superintendents in place for a very long time that have not had one performance evaluation. And at that point, the board has sort of acquiesced all of their expectations to the superintendent, and they're operating as the governing board all by themselves because the board is not setting the goals and expectations with the superintendent. So you're doing very well, and I want to thank you for that. And then the final thing I'll say, because I will go and let you keep talking, I want to thank you for your service. It has been an extraordinarily difficult year for superintendents and for school board members. I know it's hard and I know it's exhausting, and I really just want to thank you because without you serving on the board, serving the kids in your district, the world would not be as good a place as it is. So please hang in there if there's challenges ahead of you. And congratulations on being willing to tackle the subject of evaluation again, because not everybody is. So I'm going to log off, let you continue your meeting, but please reach out at any time. Pam, you do have this document in Word, I believe, so you will be able to make edits to it if you choose to proceed with something like that. But let me know what else you might need, and I hope you all take care and have a wonderful evening. It was nice to meet you.
Thank you so much.
You bet. Bye-bye.
Bye. All right, so what I think I heard everyone saying is, well, what I heard Anna saying is to go with the rubric, kind of tweak it a little bit or know that it's not going to be exactly perfect this first year. So that, our evaluation is two parts. One is what you've done last year and what our expectations are for next year. I think that second part will go really well in a conversation because now that we have the rubrics, we can look at, of those 8 standards, where do we want to focus for the next year?
So are you planning to do that in a survey like Barb
Yeah.
suggested? So
Yep.
we can quickly just vote on which standards and elements we would like to see and then compile the top ones
Yep,
moving forward?
Question.
yep.
This is a workshop, so I don't think we're making any decisions on anything here. I assume what you're doing is putting together a plan that could be presented at another board meeting. Is that correct?
Yes, of course.
Kind of just looking at consensus without.
Yes, I'm trying to get a consensus of the roadmap of where you want me to go, because I'm open to whatever this board wants to do in terms of evaluation.
I like the idea of a survey, like she suggested, that can go pretty fast instead of spending a lot of the evaluation time talking about what are we doing next, because like she said, that discussion comes in.
With ratings and places to put.
She suggested looking at putting all of these standards and elements in a survey so we could choose for next year which 2 standards and which 2 elements under those standards we would like to evaluate Superintendent Anderson on for the year moving forward.
Yes. I think that'll be an easier part.
Yeah.
I think the more difficult part is what we want to do to evaluate this last year's performance. Do we want to try and move with the rubric, knowing that he didn't have that in the beginning to, and none of us had that shared expectation. So that's kind of why I really wanted us to hear from Barb, to know and understand this booklet a little bit better, because it is overwhelming to look at all this and try and figure it out. And but when she talks about, whittling it down and just finding 2 to focus on, and having that shared language of expectations and collaboration, I think that's what really hit home for me, I think, in terms of importance, because we have been, I feel like doggy paddling, really. I mean, it's been, not clear. And so I really want to steer us in a clearer direction.
I like the idea of using these. I think the goal 1 and goal 4 match pretty well with what we've been talking about, what we talked about in June. I'm not sure I appreciate Arlen's idea on using all 4, just because, some of the elements in each of those, as you and Barb discussed, Pam, are part of student achievement and part of that larger goal. But that is a lot to be evaluated on in one
at one time. So I don't know where to go with those. But I do like the idea of trying this time with the caveat as you suggested.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you, Jennifer.
Oh, sorry. I just said I do like the idea of trying this time to see how it goes with that caveat that Anna suggested of just having it in there that Carson did not have this at the beginning, that it was not spelled out a year ago, but we're just trying it now.
The goals were stated, but the
Right.
like assessment tool was not.
Right. They talk about a two-pronged approach, having a goal for the squishy words, but then the other piece is to have the standardized analytical numbers to go with the goal. We had the first part, we just didn't have the second part. And how do you mesh those two together moving forward? Go ahead, Anna.
Well, looking at this, what we're trying to do is evaluate the progress on the goals that were set. That's one part, to me, it's one part of an evaluation of the superintendent, because there's a lot more to being a superintendent than just those items. So where or how do we do the rest of the evaluation? In the end, we could have 4 on every thing and whatever we've got on the goals, but maybe still have an issue somewhere else.
Well, that's what we were trying to ask
And I know that's kind of what you're trying to ask, so.
But maybe those issues.
But I like measuring the progress on these goals somewhere, but that is not the only thing that should be done in an evaluation to be. But that apparently is what they're telling us, or what I'm hearing.
So are those issues options for goals moving forward in the next year? I mean, if those are concerns that someone has, that could be an idea of something to work on for the following year.
Are we talking about just doing a conversation and then doing an evaluation down the road, or are we just talking about doing a conversation and evaluation this year? I'm confused. When you do evaluation or not gonna do evaluation?
Yeah,
That's what
I
I'm
think
asking.
yes, we are.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. I'm sorry, you're throwing a lot of stuff around here that I'm just trying to grasp. So.
Well, this is a lot. This is a lot, and we are not making decisions here tonight, but we'll bring it back to the next school board meeting. Hopefully, our other members will have had a chance to watch this and kind of be able to weigh in, and then we'll make a decision at the next school board meeting on how we would like to proceed. In the meantime, I will send out the last 2 evaluation summaries, the public summaries, where it states the goals.
I did send them.
Oh,
I just copied and pasted the goals and sent it out as an
Oh,
email.
perfect, thank
So,
you. So then
you guys
just
should all
saved
have
me a
it.
step, perfect.
You're
So
on top of it.
look
Yeah.
over
I didn't
that,
see them without all the other.
look over
comments.
this sheet that Barb and I worked on. And we really should, if we want to use this as a springboard, I do think that goal number 2 with student achievement, we should probably whittle it down to 2 of those 4 elements.
Could you send a survey about those? Like send a survey about which elements we use for 2 and 3?
Well, can I do that before then? I think we have to,
That's a meeting, that's maybe an open meeting.
yeah, we'll have to talk about that at our next school board meeting and decide, and then I can act on that.
I mean, we all kind of like one of them for sure. Consensus was
Yes.
the,
I mean, I
School
think if we,
improvement.
yeah,
I think we like that one. If we want to do another one, fine.
I think if we can look that over and come to the next school board meeting saying, I like B and C, I like C and D, I like it, then we can maybe have a consensus on where we would focus that one on. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Kristen, do you have any thoughts on this?
I think we're headed in the right direction, and I think that's the most important part. So we'll get through the evaluation this year, we'll come up with a plan for next year. Just one thing I think, the evaluations do not necessarily mean that a contract is extended to me in the future. I could have all 4s on every single element, and the board could decide, no thanks, Carson, we want to go in a different direction. So, and I'm not trying to minimize the evaluation because I really do think that's important. But, from my perspective, I want it to be fair and I want it to actually help us together make a difference. So you guys can decide what you want to do after my contract expires. That's up to you guys. But, in the meantime, let's just try to find something that we can coalesce on.
I think you said that well. I mean, that's the whole point is, students are at the center of all this, and how do we help the superintendent be as successful as he can be or she can be in the future? How can we help you to, and where are we going to focus our efforts and our time? So, I mean, that's really what it comes down to. Lots to think about, but we won't act on anything for another 2 weeks, but if you have any thoughts or questions, reach out to myself or Barb. Barb probably first, or maybe circle us both in on those questions so that I know the answer too. That's probably the better way of doing it, just so that I'm aware, so that I can help facilitate the best way to move forward. That's really what I want too, is to just make a better process, because we haven't had a good process. We've been trying.
We did a 71 question.
Yeah, that's a lot.
evaluation.
Yeah.
Well, geez, after a while, after about 24th question, you just get tired of answering it.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, that's why we scaled back.
Oh my
So
goodness.
I learned a lot from Barb, if we could just use that to gauge which ones to choose.
Right.
I mean, it just makes so much sense. It's not as, I don't want to say confrontational, but it's not as boring to go through. And you just pick the ones that are most essential. I think
And then
makes a lot of sense.
each evaluation we've done has got, is there anything else you'd like to?
Yes. There will always be that option. So I think that's kind of where you catch the catch-all at the end, like anything else. There will always be an open-ended,
Oh,
Comments.
and there should be,
yes,
for everybody's benefit.
yes.
Oh, by the way, Arlen, if I could add here, or actually both Arlen and Jim, like when I'm evaluating principals, for example, I choose certain elements now and I tell them for sure you're going to be evaluated in these areas. I like that for this year, it's a couple of them are equity related. But then I also kind of reserve the right to pick elements if I see there's a weakness. So, or something I really want to emphasize personally. So I'm choosing hiring practices, and so I'm picking certain hirings that I'm going to evaluate to make sure that it was following district policy. And then I mark them on that. So, and so I kind of get where you're coming from. If there's a question or concern, you say, geez, Karski, you got to do this. And I don't know how to do that, and mesh it with what Barb was saying, but, I recognize that could be an issue, and so we're going to have to figure that out.
All right, I'm seeing some glassy eyes,
Let's get
so
out of here.
do I have a motion to
I don't
adjourn?
can you even do a motion?
We have to do it on the meeting, yeah?
It's a workshop.
I don't
Yeah.
think we need one of those.
I don't think so. I think you just
All
have
right,
it.
8:34, we are
Just call it.
adjourning.
Okay.
Thank you, Lisa.
Sorry, I don't mean to.
No, you're fine. Takes a village. Jim, takes a village.
I almost thought about doing it too, and I thought, what do we even do it on?
I thought we had before, but
I think we probably
I
have.
think we have.
I'm not saying we haven't.
No, we don't have it. Okay.
Well, I'd rather do too much than not enough. Is that anything I need to sign or not in there?
I don't think so. I think it was
Just you?
Okay, good.
I didn't see it.